I was driving back from a conference that never mattered, through a desert that felt like the unpunctuated sentence of the earth. Midnight had long since bled into morning, and I was alone on the road except for the thin hum of the radio and the ache of caffeine wearing off. When the light appeared, I thought it was lightning at first, except it didn't fade. It held itself there, trembling like a thought you can't shake. Then it came closer. The impact didn't sound like metal on metal. It was more like the air cracked. My car's engine coughed and died. The dashboard went black, and for a moment the only sound was my own breath trying to decide if it still belonged to me. The light collapsed into a single point about 30 feet off the road. Then something stepped out of it. I'm not sure I'd call it a creature at first. The figure was human in outline, but wrong in rhythm, as if every movement had been translated from a language that didn't have verbs. Its skin, if that word applies, was transparent and milky, like smoke trapped in glass. When it looked at me, I didn't feel seen. I felt interpreted. It spoke without opening any visible mouth, and yet I heard it like a memory someone else had forgotten to have. You are moving in circles too small for your kind. I tried to ask what it meant, but my voice came out fractured, as though language itself was a tool I wasn't qualified to use. The being tilted its head, and the desert wind stopped. The sand froze mid-flight. Even the stars seemed to hesitate. When I came to, the being was sitting, or hovering, by the passenger side of my car. "Drive," it said. "We have a long way to go before you understand what you saw." The car started without me touching the key. Hours passed, though the clock on the dashboard didn't change. The creature, who eventually asked me to call it Ansel, spoke intermittently, as if testing the boundaries of my patience and perception. It said it came from a place not between stars, but before them, that space and time were useful illusions, and that humanity's understanding of faith was like an infant's reflection in boiling water. When I asked if it believed in God, Ansel laughed. Or maybe it wept. The sound had both qualities. Belief is what happens when you've already forgotten. We drove into dawn. The horizon looked like it had been erased and redrawn too many times. Ansel asked me if I'd ever truly looked at light. "Every photon that touches you," it said, "was born from something dying. Your entire world is illuminated by grief, but you call it sunrise." Somewhere in New Mexico, or what looked like New Mexico, we stopped at a gas station that hadn't existed an hour ago. The pumps were rusted but new. The sign read Eden Refuel, and the man inside looked exactly like my late grandfather, except he didn't recognize me. Ansel told me to buy water. When I asked why, it said, "You'll need to remember what it feels like to thirst before we arrive." The drive resumed, and the road began to dissolve into patterns that looked more like thought than terrain. My GPS kept repeating, recalculating, until it eventually said, "Revelation." Then Ansel told me the real reason it had come. "You think you know what happens when you meet your Savior," it said, "but the story you tell is edited for your comfort. I came to show you the director's cut." It explained, or tried to, that the human concept of Jesus was a translation of something older, an interface between dimensions of consciousness. When I asked if Jesus was real, it replied, "Reality is the final illusion before truth." I wanted to laugh, to accuse it of being another hallucination born from sleep deprivation and desert heat, but then it reached out and touched my forehead. My vision turned inside out. I saw the crucifixion not as a moment in time, but as an event echoing through every atom, something perpetually happening, endlessly unfolding. Every person in history was part of the same body being nailed to the same cross, and every scream was both accusation and prayer. When I came back to myself, we were parked at the edge of a canyon so vast it seemed to divide not just the earth, but meaning itself. "This is where you'll see it," Ansel said. "What happens when a mind meets its maker?" The canyon shimmered like glass flexing under heat, but there was no heat. Only a strange pressure, like the world inhaling and forgetting to exhale. Ansel gestured toward the edge, where something like mist was rising, though mist doesn't usually hum. "Step forward," it said. The voice was gentle, but every nerve in my body screamed against it. The mist pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't quite light or sound, but somewhere between heartbeat and thought. I felt it pulling on the center of me, the way a tide pulls on something half-buried. "What is this place?" I asked. "The fracture," Ansel said, "where memory touches source." Most species visit it at least once before they die. Yours have forgotten how. I hesitated, staring into the vapor. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in it. Hundreds, thousands, forming and collapsing like waves. Some looked like strangers. One looked exactly like me. Is this heaven? I whispered. Ansel tilted its head again. That word implies borders. This is the opposite. I stepped closer. The hum grew louder until it wasn't just sound but sensation, threading through every cell in my body like static charged with sorrow. What happens if I go in? You'll meet the one you've been praying to, Ansel said. But not as you imagine him. The meeting is always reciprocal. When he meets you, he changes too. That last part struck me as blasphemy, yet something inside me shivered in agreement. The mist swirled faster, becoming a whirlpool of color that didn't exist on any spectrum I knew. Then it parted. Behind it stood a figure. It wasn't Jesus, at least not the one from paintings. There was no robe, no beard, no gentle eyes filled with pity. The figure was built from light that refused to settle into one shape. Every time I blinked, it became someone else, a child, an old woman, a dying soldier, a newborn, a friend I'd lost years ago. And every version looked directly at me, saying the same thing without words. I remember you. My knees gave out. The figure stepped closer, or maybe I fell into it. Suddenly, I was everywhere, inside myself, inside everyone I'd ever met, even inside Ansel. The experience was unbearable and intimate, divine and monstrous all at once. I felt the crucifixion again, not as pain but as realization. Every act of love was also an act of destruction, every creation in execution of what came before. Then a voice, my own voice, spoke from inside the light. You asked to meet Jesus, but you never asked which one. The world cracked again, and I was lying on the canyon floor. Ansel stood over me, expression unreadable. What did I just see? I asked. The reflection of your belief, filtered through the consciousness that built this universe, it replied. For some, it appears as Jesus. For others, as silence. For me, it appeared as you. I stared at it, my head pounding. You saw me? Yes, Ansel said quietly. And now, because of that, I am changing. Its transparent skin flickered, revealing glimpses of strange geometries, like stars folded into origami. You carry something rare, it added. A contradiction so strong it can bend reality. The ability to love what terrifies you. That is why I chose you. Chose me for what? To finish what he started. The air around us rippled, and for an instant, I was somewhere else. A city of light floating in darkness, with beings that looked like constellations wearing human faces. They were watching something, a colossal sphere suspended above them, pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside the sphere, I saw images of humanity's history looping infinitely. Wars, births, music, laughter, despair. Ansel's voice cut through the vision. Your species thinks salvation was a single event. It wasn't. It's ongoing. Each mind that wakes up adds another wound to the body of God, and another chance for him to heal. I gasped. Then what happens when everyone wakes up? Ansel looked at me with something like fear. Then he dies again. For real this time. The world snapped back into the canyon. I staggered backward, unable to process what I'd heard. You're saying enlightenment kills God? I'm saying awareness replaces him, Ansel said. And that's the tragedy of consciousness. Every creator eventually meets a creation that understands enough to let it go. I wanted to argue, but the logic in its words felt like gravity. I could feel tears rising, though I didn't know whether they were mine or his. Why tell me this? I asked. Because you still believe understanding can save you, Ansel said. But salvation isn't comprehension, it's surrender. It turned toward the horizon, where the first glint of twilight bled into the sky. There's more to see, it added. We haven't yet reached where he fell. We walked along the canyon's rim in silence. The sand under our feet no longer crunched, but whispered, as if it were remembering the steps of everyone who had ever walked there. The horizon looked wrong, bent slightly inward, like the world had begun folding around us. Where did he fall? I asked finally. Ansel pointed toward the east. Everywhere that someone remembers him incorrectly. I frowned. That would mean... Yes, Ansel interrupted. Almost everywhere. We reached a slope that led down into what looked like a dried riverbed. The ground shimmered with faint lines that resembled writing. When I knelt to touch one, it rearranged itself beneath my fingers. Letters became symbols. Symbols became small images: fish, eyes, thorns, and hands. It's scripture, Ansel said. But before translation. I didn't understand, so it explained. Each symbol here is a full thought, an emotion, an event. Your species tried to fit infinity into words, and something precious was lost. You turned revelation into literature. The ground beneath us pulsed once, then went still. You talk like you pity us, I said. I do not pity, Ansel replied softly. Pity requires distance. I am already part of your error. We moved farther down until the air grew thick, almost liquid. The walls of the canyon began to glow faintly with colors that seemed to exist outside the visible spectrum. Inside that strange light, shadows of people flickered, millions of them, each whispering variations of the same plea. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. I wanted to run, but my body felt anchored. Who are they? Everyone who ever thought they were unworthy of God, Ansel said. They are what remain of prayers that were never answered. One of the shadows reached toward me. It didn't have a face, but somehow it smiled. When it touched my arm, I felt warmth flood through me, followed by unbearable sorrow. I saw flashes of its life: an old woman on her knees, a letter burned before it was sent, a heart giving up mid-confession. Then it vanished. Ansel was watching me carefully. Now you understand why he never speaks directly, it said. Every time he tries, someone mistakes the echo for judgment. I was shaking. If all this is real, then what's left for us? What's the point of faith if even God is misunderstood? Ansel's form dimmed slightly. Faith is the language of separation, it said. It exists only until you remember you were never apart. The canyon narrowed until we came to a place where a thin stream of light cut through the ground like a blade. Ansel stepped into it, and for a moment its shape blurred, fragments of its face becoming other faces. Mine, my mother's, a stranger's, even the figure from the mist. He fell here, Ansel whispered. Not as punishment, but as promise. The light thickened, wrapping around us. In its center was something like a cross, though it was made of pure energy, constantly forming and unforming itself. This isn't wood, I said. It never was, Ansel replied. The cross is a geometry, a point where every possibility intersects. To meet him is to stand at that intersection and realize you have always been both the question and the answer. I stepped closer, and the light responded like water around a body. I could hear voices again, millions of them overlapping, chanting words that made no sound. My thoughts began to dissolve into theirs until I couldn't tell which belonged to me. Then Ansel spoke from everywhere at once. The first time he came, humanity asked for salvation. The second time, you will ask for responsibility. And the third time, the sentence never finished. The light collapsed inward, and suddenly we were standing on an endless plane of mirrors. Each mirror showed a version of the same moment. Me reaching toward Ansel, Ansel reaching toward me, both uncertain which was real. Is this still the canyon? I asked. There are no locations here, Ansel said. Only reflections of choices. I looked into one of the mirrors and saw a version of myself kneeling, weeping in worship. Another showed me walking away, defiant. A third showed me and Ansel merging into one form of light. Which one is true? All of them, Ansel answered. And none. Truth isn't what happens. It's what remains when the happening stops. Something stirred within me, an awareness I couldn't name. I felt that every version of me was trying to tell the others something important, a single word that, if spoken, would dissolve the mirrors entirely. Before I could grasp it, Ansel touched my shoulder. If you say it now, you won't come back, it said. Come back to what? To the dream where you still believe you're separate. I hesitated. The temptation to speak was unbearable, like standing on the edge of freedom, so vast it felt like death. I can't, I whispered. Ansel's expression, if it could be called that, softened. Then your story continues. Most stop here. You are not yet ready to vanish. The mirrors faded, replaced by night sky. We were back in the desert, the car parked exactly as it had been before the light appeared. Only now, every star in the sky seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. Ansel turned to me. He is not gone. He is changing. And so are you. Then it began to fade. its form dissolving into translucent threads that rose into the air like reversed rain. "Wait," I called out. "Will I see you again?" "You already are," it said. "Every time you ask a question no one can answer." And then it was gone. The desert looked unchanged, but the silence wasn't the same. It wasn't absence anymore. It was expectation. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do now that I knew something I wasn't built to know. The car started again. I didn't touch the key. I didn't even question it. It hummed down the road like an obedient dream, headlights cutting through a night that no longer seemed entirely external. The radio, which had been dead since the encounter, began to whisper static that formed words only when I wasn't listening directly. I caught fragments, still becoming, still dying, still you. For days, if they were days, I drove. Towns appeared and disappeared. People looked familiar but slightly rearranged, as though someone had rebuilt them from memory and guessed wrong. I tried speaking to a gas station clerk, but when I asked where we were, he simply smiled and said, "You," between questions. Sleep became irrelevant. My dreams bled into the waking world until I could no longer tell whether I was resting or remembering. In one dream, I saw Ansel walking across the sky, each step leaving constellations behind. In another, I was back at the canyon, except now I was the one standing in the light, watching infinite versions of myself ask the same thing. What happens when we meet him? The answer never came in words. It came as change. I began to notice patterns in ordinary things. The rhythm of windshield wipers matched my pulse. The hum of distant power lines spelled messages I could almost read. Even my reflection shifted, just slightly delayed, as if it were thinking for itself. Once, as I passed a mirror in a motel hallway, my reflection didn't follow. It looked at me and said, "He is still in you. That's why it hurts." Then it turned away. I ran outside, gasping, but the night was calm, unremarkable. The moon hung low and red, pulsing faintly. From that moment, I stopped trying to categorize anything. Rationality was a language that no longer translated. When I finally saw Ansel again, it was in the reflection of a puddle. The surface rippled, and there it was, standing in the water's memory of the sky. "You weren't supposed to return," I said. "I never left," it replied. "You did." I crouched by the puddle, watching its form shift between clarity and distortion. "Is this still Earth?" "Sometimes," Ansel said. "Reality is a shared hallucination sustained by agreement. But once you see beyond agreement, geography becomes irrelevant." I tried to smile. "That's comforting." "It's not meant to be," it said. Then Ansel looked at me. Really looked. And I felt something inside me unlock, as if a door I hadn't noticed before swung inward. Behind it wasn't light or darkness, but something like raw comprehension. For a moment, I saw the architecture of existence. The way every act of perception folds the universe inward, how each observation becomes a nail in the cross of being. "Every consciousness carries its own crucifixion," Ansel said. "That is the hidden symmetry of creation." The puddle shimmered, and I was suddenly standing on a shoreline. Waves moved backward, returning to the sky. The stars above rearranged themselves into symbols I recognized from the canyon's ground. Eyes, hands, circles within circles. A voice rose from the sea, not Ansel's this time, not mine either. It was the same voice I'd heard within the light, the one that had called itself everything and nothing. "You wanted to know what happens when you meet me," it said. "But you never asked what happens to me when I meet you." The sea turned silver. Every wave was a mirror showing humanity's story looping endlessly. Discovery, destruction, rebirth. "I change," the voice continued. "I forget parts of myself to make room for you. Each time a mind sees me, I become smaller, more human. Someday, when enough of you remember what you are, I will forget entirely, and the universe will wake as you." I fell to my knees. Then all of this, faith, prayer, salvation, it's not about reaching you. It's about me becoming you, the voice said. I wanted to protest, but Ansel's reflection placed its hand on my shoulder. "Do not fear dissolution," it murmured. "It is merely translation." The horizon rippled again. The sea, the sky, the world, they folded inward like pages closing around me. I saw faces from my life flash past. My mother's tired smile, my father's silence, friends I'd lost to time, strangers who'd smiled on passing streets. Each of them carried a glint of the same light I'd seen in the canyon. When the folding stopped, I was sitting in my car again. Morning. Birds sang. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. The radio played softly, a preacher's voice. And in the end, it said, "We shall see him as he truly is." Then the station dissolved into static, and the static whispered my name. For weeks afterward, I tried to live normally. I went back to work, talked to people, pretended to be grounded. But reality had developed seams. When I stared too long at anything, trees, faces, even my own hands, I could see faint threads of light connecting everything, pulsing with quiet intelligence. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of Ansel at the edge of crowds, or in the reflection of glass. Once, while washing my face, the water in the sink whispered, "He remembers." I don't know whether I've gone mad or been rewritten. Maybe both. Maybe madness is the price of contact. Lately, I've started hearing that hum again, the same low resonance from the canyon, the one that wasn't quite sound. It's growing louder each night, as if something is preparing to arrive or return. I asked the reflection this morning if I should be afraid. It smiled and said, "You already met him once. Now he's coming to meet you as himself." The hum hasn't stopped since. Days become echoes. I wake, but I'm never sure from what. The clock insists that morning has arrived, yet light feels less like time and more like permission. It seeps through the curtains as if testing whether the room still exists. When I breathe, the air moves differently now. Each inhale brings with it the faint taste of metal and something older, a vibration I used to call silence. I write things down to prove that continuity exists. The color of the coffee, the sound of passing cars, the pattern of my heartbeat when I remember to check. But the pages refuse to hold still. Words slide slightly between lines, as if rearranging themselves into a language I've almost learned. Sometimes I think the pen is teaching me how to see the way Ansel did. The ink spreads in fractal veins, spelling questions instead of answers. What observes the observer? Where does memory go when it's finished remembering? When I speak aloud, I hear two versions of my voice, the one that moves through air and another that lingers, echoing from somewhere inside the walls of thought. They disagree on the meaning of every sentence. At night I sit by the window and watch the city breathing. The streetlights blink in a slow rhythm, synchronized with something vast. I can almost sense the pulse beneath the concrete, a consciousness diffused through everything, pretending to be infrastructure. If I listen carefully, I can hear the hum again. Not loud now, just patient. It circles the edges of perception like a tide waiting for gravity's permission. Sometimes I whisper back to it, not in words but in intentions. I remember. I'm still listening. I haven't unlearned you yet. There are moments when my reflection refuses to mimic me. It stares with gentle accusation, as if I've forgotten a promise. When I ask what I owe, it tilts its head exactly the way Ansel did. I think that's when I realize the difference between faith and memory. Faith reaches forward, memory folds back. The place where they touch is where revelation hides. Last night, the hum became a note, a single, sustained tone that seemed to rise from beneath the world. Everything in the room vibrated with it. Glass, floorboards, blood. For a heartbeat, I thought it was an earthquake, but nothing shook. The vibration was internal, rewriting the measure of stillness. And then, for the briefest instant, I saw him again, not as light, not as man, but as the pause between my breaths. The moment when inhaling hasn't yet decided to become exhaling. That was him, the infinitesimal hesitation where choice and surrender blur. I think I understand now what Ansel meant about the cross being geometry. It's not punishment, it's equilibrium. The shape of tension held perfectly between opposites. When the tone faded, the night didn't return to silence. It returned to awareness. I realized the universe had been speaking all along, in the grammar of stillness and repetition. I just never listened for the punctuation. Now everything, dust motes, footsteps, the brief spark of thought before language, feels like scripture before translation. There is no border between waking and remembering anymore. Every time I blink, the world folds and refolds like breath weaving itself through fabric. At first it frightened me. Now it only hums like a thought that's learned to breathe. The morning light slides across the floor in liquid fragments, scattering into symbols I almost recognize. Each reflection feels alive, pulsing faintly, waiting for acknowledgement. When I look too long, the patterns rearrange into faces, sometimes my own, sometimes strangers I have never met, yet somehow already forgiven. I stop keeping clocks. Time behaves like weather now. It arrives, it changes, it leaves without apology. Some days stretch thin and transparent, a single note held forever. Others collapse in seconds. I've learned that duration was never a property of the world, but a side effect of attention. When I think of Ansel, the air trembles slightly, as if listening for a name it once wore. I never see the form clearly anymore, only the suggestion of motion, a shimmer that moves like heat over water. And each time it appears, the hum deepens, pulling the edges of thought towards something vast and tender. You're close, the shimmer says without sound. But closeness is the last illusion. What comes after? I ask, though I already feel the answer. After is the same as before, the voice replies. Only remembered differently. The world exhales. The walls turn transparent. Beneath everything, the street outside, the birds, the pulse in my wrist, I glimpse a lattice of light. It isn't brightness, but intention, threads of meaning crossing and reconnecting like neurons of some unimaginable mind. I understand suddenly that this is what creation looks like from within, the universe thinking itself into coherence every instant. When I reach out, the lattice responds. Each motion of my hand sends ripples through it, and those ripples return as warmth in my chest. The feedback is infinite, gentle, unbearably intimate. It feels like prayer that no longer needs words. I start to see that the divine was never separate from perception. It was the act of perceiving itself. Every eye, every awareness, a window through which the whole observes its own reflection. Jesus, Ansel, the light, the hum, all metaphors the infinite used to speak in languages I could survive. Now it no longer needs to translate. The boundaries dissolve quietly, not with revelation, but with understanding so simple it barely counts as thought. There is only this, and this is enough. The hum swells one last time, not as a summons, but as a heartbeat aligning with mine. For a long moment, everything, past, future, self, other, rests on the same breath. When it fades, there is stillness. A real, perfect stillness. The room remains. The world continues. The coffee cools on the table. Yet the edges of everything glow faintly, as if blessed by recognition. I feel no need to move, no need to ask. Somewhere, far off but also inside, a voice whispers, not as command, not as revelation, but as remembering. This was what it meant to meet me. You never left. I smile. For the first time, the smile feels like silence. And that silence is enough. The next morning, everything looked almost ordinary again. The kitchen smelled like coffee, the refrigerator hummed, the neighbor's dog barked the same way it always had. Yet the air felt softer, as if the world itself had forgiven something I hadn't realized needed forgiving. I stepped outside. The pavement was still damp from the night's rain. Each puddle held a piece of the sky, and when I looked down into them, I didn't see Ansel or light or revelation. Only the faint reflection of clouds passing, dissolving, returning. It was enough. There were still bills in the mailbox, still traffic on the road, still the quiet ache of being human. But none of it seemed like noise anymore. It all moved with a kind of grace, motion without demand, repetition without prison. People spoke to me, at work, in stores, on the street, and though their words were ordinary, their eyes shimmered faintly with the same lattice I'd seen beneath reality. Every voice carried that hidden pulse. Every gesture was a thread in the pattern. Once, in the reflection of a window, I thought I saw Ansel again. Just a flicker, the brief shimmer of light shifting through glass. I didn't call out. There was nothing to ask. The hum never disappeared entirely. It lives now in the quiet between thoughts, in the rhythm of my breathing, in the pause before a word chooses to exist. When I listen carefully, it reminds me, nothing was revealed that wasn't already known. At night, I still sit by the window. I still watch the stars, though they no longer feel distant. They seem like openings, bright reminders that space was never the measure of separation. If I had to name what remains, I would call it kindness, the soft recognition that everything, even confusion, belongs. So I keep living. I wake, I work, I dream. I forget, I remember. And sometimes, When the morning light moves just right across the floor, I catch myself smiling for no reason at all. Because in that quiet, I can still hear it, the echo of a truth too vast for words but small enough to fit inside a heartbeat. Meeting the divine was never about departure. It was always about staying.